So these are some of the people we'll meet tonight, men and women. They're all dead. I was very careful to make sure that I could not be sued by any living character I'm going to talk about. So there they are. And like many Scottish towns, Linlithgow has had over the centuries its fair share of characters. And you'll see some of them here. Have we any bigger characters than those people? Kenspeckle, historic, eccentric, memorable folk who enlivened the townscape and added to our rich heritage. Spot the minister competition. Researching far back in the town's history is not easy. Primary evidence is scanty, but one 16th century character stands out in a long line of Linlithgow's notable churchmen. In the early 1520s, the head of St. Michael's Church was this chap, George Crichton. Appointed in his 30s, he made rapid promotion from a lowly position in Balmerino Abbey, near his birthplace in Fife. Then he became Abbot of Holyrood, before being appointed Lord Privy Seal, and then Roman Catholic cleric in Linlithgow. George sums up all that was good and bad about the pre-Reformation church. He did enhance the fabric of St. Michael's and commissioned a beautiful oak roof for the chancel and apse, similar to that still in situ in Parliament Hall in Edinburgh. However, it would appear that he was ordered to do so by Pope Leo X as penance for a breach of ecclesiastical order. We can only guess what. My picture may give you ideas. When the new roof was unveiled, it was noticed that it bore several escutcheons bearing the letters G and C. Is that God and Christ, he was asked. Certainly not, replied the good cleric. It's for George Crichton. He was a very wealthy man, possessing at least 2 properties in Edinburgh, one near the Tron Church called Clamshell House, so named after the carving above the door of the symbol of Saint Jacques de Compostela. And he also owned Maison Dieu at the head of Bell's Wynd, which, to be fair, he later gifted to the Hospital of St. Thomas. In 1527, he was promoted again to be Bishop of Dunkeld, where his reputation for lavish hospitality continued. He was described as, and I quote, a man nobly disposed, very hospitable, and a magnificent host. He entertained often in the great hall of the Bishop's Palace, or in Moncur Castle, just west of Dundee, which he had also acquired. However, as excellent a party giver as he was, it was also reported that in matters of religion, he was not much skilled. When asked to reprimand Thomas Forret, Vicar of Dollar, for reading from the Bible, quote, in English to vulgar people, he commanded the cleric to limit his preaching to just one good gospel each Sunday. On being asked by the errant minister just which gospels were the bad ones, Crichton replied that he hadn't a clue, as he had read neither the Old Testament nor the New. There are even fewer documented female characters in Linlithgow's history. The case of Agnes Dallop is well known, burned at the stake for witchcraft in 1648. And her crime? Being argumentative and perhaps rather free with her affections. She admitted, admittedly under duress, that she had slept with the devil. For £21 and 15 shillings and 4 pence, Agnes met her fate amidst a large bonfire beside the old Cross Well. But the town could now rest easy. Evil had been burned from her soul and from the town. No other women were killed in this manner in Linlithgow, although several were examined, including Margaret Kennedy, who in 1618 was arrested and questioned in St. Michael's by the Reverend Robert Cornwall, Sheriff Alexander Hamilton, and Provost Andrew Glenn, a man who had actually met King James VI and was deeply influenced by the monarch's book, Demonology, a compendium of witchcraft and how to spot it. Margaret escaped such scrutiny. In 1624, Elspeth Paris fell foul of the witchcraft laws and the Book of Exodus, which it declares against witches. Along with an accused warlock, David Langlandis, they were both examined in the toll booth by Sir John Hamilton of Grange and Sheriff Sir Walter Dundas, who ordered a search for the devil's mark. Gone too fast. The devil's mark, of course, being the bit on the body that feels no pain. It would appear as if insufficient proof of witchcraft was obtained, for I can find no record of any punishment. All of these accused women were outspoken characters who were reported by men, furious at being angrily addressed by mere females, by second Eves who had been led astray by the devil. This was the case with Helen Trotton, implicated as an accomplice during the trial of Agnes Stewart. Both are reported as having the devil's mark found on them, a blemish that felt no pain when pricked. They had both also taken part in the, quote, curious activity of conversing with cats. And in the case of Miss Stewart, I quote, trying to predict the identity of her future husband by necromancy. By the late 18th century, the laws against witchcraft had been revoked. However, this did not stop people from wondering about those who were different or eccentric. Take the case of a misshapen Linlithgow female with a humpy back, cross eyes and a bewhiskered mouth, known to all as Wispy Moo. This odd-looking character frequented woodland around Linlithgow and was rumoured to be the illegitimate offspring of a powerful local family, and they paid for her simple lodgings. Wispy became an expert in the medicinal and aphrodisiacal properties of plants, and she would secretly sell her potion to the men of the town. One such customer, John Kennaway, met the creature one dark night at the far end of the Peel and received a potion. Knowing that he was an elder of St. Michael's, instead of asking for money, Wispy declared that all she wanted was for him to ensure that she received, when she passed, a proper burial in St. Michael's kirkyard. She duly obtained the promise from Kennaway, but when she did die, the elder was unable to persuade the kirk session to allow her request. She was an unholy creature, illegitimate, perhaps even a witch. So she was duly buried in a pauper's grave outside the perimeter of the graveyard, and she has never forgiven the town for that. Ever since, many locals testified that they had seen her rummaging sometimes in the graveyard wall as it overhung the Peel, looking, it would seem, for human bones to continue her necromancy, her face in death just as hairy and even more frightening. Another dealer in medicinal plants was Stephen Mitchell, who in 1723 set up a tobacco manufacturing business at 150 High Street. Initially, the company produced snuff, the tobacco leaves being brought overland from Glasgow or by ship to Blackness after arrival from the West Indies. The original Stephen Mitchell's grandson, also called Stephen, was born in Linlithgow and attended the local grammar school, the one behind the Borough Halls, where he proved to be a bright lad. He joined the family business in 1809, and on the death of his father, took over control of the operation, being admitted a burgess and guild brother of the borough, and even more prestigiously, a member of the Fraternity of Dyers. By 1825, the factory was producing not just snuff, which was ground at the family-owned mill near Walk Milton, but also cigars and pipe tobacco, sold under the names of Tam O'Shanter and Prize Crop. On March's days, Mitchell supplied every dyer with a quantity of his products. Cigarettes, of course, were a later invention, and by the time cigarette smoking caught on, the Mitchell Tobacco Company had moved to candle rigs in Glasgow. The reason was apparently a change in import legislation, which restricted the arrival of tobacco to a few designated ports, ones with bonded warehouses, and the port of Blackness was not among them. Stephen Mitchell retired to Muffet in 1859, a very wealthy man with no family. He had been in love, but had been jilted on his wedding day at the altar of St. Michael's when his fiancée, Isabella Cameron, didn't turn up. Instead, to add fuel to the fire, she married later Stephen's brother, Nelson. After Stephen's death in 1874, it was discovered that she had left a bequest of £67,000, that's about £7 million today, to set up a public library in Glasgow, the Mitchell Library, now one of the largest in Europe. Stephen is buried in the family plot in St. Michael's Kirkyard, a place I often point out, remarking that in his case, it may not be a matter of dust to dust, but certainly, given his tobacco connection, one of ashes to ashes. I also ponder over what Linlithgow might have gained in the way of a public bequest had Mitchell's company remained in the borough. I could have filled this presentation with tales of the Dawsons of Bonnyton, a family which supplied no fewer than 3 provosts of Linlithgow in the 19th century, together serving a total of 41 years. And here are the Dawsons. A nice cheery bunch, are they not? But another member of the family has always intrigued me. This was James Dawson, born in Bonnyton House in 1806, the son of Adam Dawson, estate owner and whisky producer. James worked for a while in the family distillery, then at Bonnyton Farm, but decided that he much preferred working in the farming side of the family's business. When it was decided to move the whisky factory to St. Magdalene's, the site on Edinburgh Road, James decided it was the right time for him to emigrate to Australia. He landed in Hobson's Bay at Port Phillip in May 1840, along with his wife, Joan Park, a niece of Mungo Park, the famous Scottish explorer of West Africa. Perhaps Mungo's genes had been passed on to Joan, for she seems to have enjoyed travelling with her husband as he moved from job to job. Beginning in a dairy farm in the Yarra Valley, before moving to a larger agricultural concern in the Port Fairy district, where he became a partner in a cattle and sheep station some 10 miles east of Macarthur called Kangatong. He became fascinated by Aboriginal culture, and in 1881, along with his 38-year-old daughter Isabella, he wrote a book on the Aboriginal language and traditions. He vigorously stood up for native Australian rights whenever he felt that government actions were threatening their way of life. At the age of 76, he paid a visit back to Linlithgow, his native town, and gave a lecture in the borough halls. This included magic lantern slides of Aboriginal life and customs, and a photograph of the memorial that he had erected, commemorating the last surviving member of the Jargord Wurrung tribe. He returned to Australia and died in 1900, aged 93. Staying in the Victorian period, I was happy to find the borough could proudly boast a holder of the Victoria Cross. The recipient was Robert Blair, born in Avonton House, which stood close to the site of the present-day Brookfield recycling plant. Sadly, Avonton House burned down while it was in the ownership of the McConaughey family, who had inherited the building through marriage. But the previous owners were the Blairs, and in 1834, Robert was born to Janet Nourse, wife of William Blair, a prominent lawyer. Robert was an academically gifted student who excelled at Glasgow University and then at Balliol College, Oxford, where he too studied law. However, he chose to join the army, and a commission was purchased for him in the Dragoon Guards. In 1856, he was posted to India, where his regiment was involved in what was called by the British the Indian Mutiny. In September 1857, after a fiercely fought cavalry action, Lieutenant Blair was ordered to retrieve an ammunition wagon. With a small platoon, he was ambushed by 60 Indians and received a severe sabre cut on his left shoulder. He was rescued and taken back to his own lines, where his arm had to be amputated. Blair was recommended for the VC and eventually received his medal from Queen Victoria in August 1858. It was purchased from the family in 2018 and is now on display in the Dragoon Guards Regimental Museum in Cardiff Castle. Almost immediately after the investiture, Blair returned to India, but tragically he contracted smallpox and died in Cawnpore in March 1859. He was buried in this, the old British cemetery, but in an unmarked grave. A contemporary of Robert Blair was Charles Wyville Thomson, born in Bonside House in March 1830, the son of Andrew Thomson, a surgeon in the service of the East India Company. His wife was Sarah Ann Drummond Smith, and their child was actually baptised in St. Michael's as Wyville Charles, but later he preferred to be called Charles. After graduating in medicine in Aberdeen University, Edinburgh University, he became fascinated by the natural world. And after a second degree in botany, he obtained a succession of prestigious teaching posts, ending up in the natural history chair at Edinburgh, where among others he taught Arthur Conan Doyle. But he's best remembered for his studies of the oceans. Having charted marine life in the depths of the Norwegian Sea, he was given the use of a 14-year-old steam-assisted Royal Navy corvette, HMS Challenger. With Thomson as chief scientist, the ship set sail on 23rd December 1872 on what was to be a 3-year, 68,000 nautical mile voyage, during which the oceans of the world were charted and 4,700 new species of marine life discovered. Several deep water dredges were made, including one in the deepest part of the Pacific, over 35,000 feet, that is 6.5 miles down. This part of the Mariana Trench is called today the Challenger Deep. Unfortunately, the expedition also gave its name to the ill-fated American shuttle, which exploded in 1986, resulting in the death of all 7 crew members, including Christa McAuliffe. But Wyville Thomson's mission was a great success and resulted in him receiving many scientific honours and being knighted by Queen Victoria. He retired from teaching and in his study at Bonside set about writing a full account of the Challenger voyage and its scientific discoveries. The task killed him. He was always of generally poor health, and being highly strung and obsessive, the strain of writing up what eventually turned out to be 50 volumes of detailed illustration and scientific description proved to be his downfall. He eventually had to give up and took to his bed a broken man, dying at Bonside on 10th March 1882. The house was sold shortly thereafter, and over the years has had a variety of owners. Wyville Thomson's headstone stands on the north side of St. Michael's, while the publishing of the Challenger discoveries was finally completed by his friend and colleague Sir John Murray. Wyville Thomson is also commemorated in the stained glass window above the altar in St. Michael's Church. I used to tell the story I'd heard many times that his friends who contributed to the cost and the designer of the stained glass at Clayton and Bell must have known little about the natural world, as they had included a depiction on the seabed of a red lobster, while everyone knows that lobsters are dark blue or black and only turn red when cooked. However, recently a close-up shot was taken by David Elliott, and it can be quite clearly seen it is a crab, like some found on the expedition. There is another interesting local connection to stained glass. William Frater was born in 1890 in Wester Ochiltree farmhouse on the Rosebery estate. His father was the mole catcher. William attended schools in Bridgend and then King's Cavell before going on to study at Linlithgow Academy, which had opened in 1902 at the Low Port. William later attended the Glasgow School of Art, where he won the Haldane Scholarship for drawing. His talent impressed the manager of the Oscar Patterson Glass Studio in Glasgow, and he was offered a part-time apprenticeship there. William was keen to continue an artistic career, but his family was not in favour, declaring that there was no future in being an artist and he would die penniless. Better be a mole catcher like your dad. So in 1913, William decided to emigrate and boarded the liner Norseman en route to Melbourne in Australia, where he found employment as overseer of stained glass design at Brooks, Robinson and Co. He enrolled in the Victorian Artists Society life classes, but he was asked to leave. I've been unable to find out why, but it may not be a coincidence that one of his life models that he painted, Winnie Dow, fell pregnant. They married and took up residence in Alphington, a suburb of Melbourne. By all accounts, William was a stubborn, dogmatic, red-headed Scot, whom everyone called Jock. His work for many churches was much admired, but his own creations, both in stained glass and in paintings, were sometimes not so well received. Much of it was impressionistic in the manner of Cézanne, and William made enemies by mocking the prevalent conservative tastes in Australian art. His several exhibitions of large landscapes and nude women, some shown here, evoked mixed reviews. One commentator reporting that Frater was a typical gloomy Scot, an enemy of light and gaiety. He is regarded today, however, much more appreciatively, and at his death in 1974 was much lamented as one of Australia's leading artists. This is a portrait of William by artist Maria Teresa Vigano. William's cousin John stayed in Scotland and moved from his birthplace, 3 Mile Town, to work in Glasgow as a house joiner. He stayed in Doonbank, a cottage in old Easterhouse village, now demolished and the area swamped by newer housing. In his spare time, John Frater produced beautiful pieces of furniture, including one he presented to St. Michael's, where he had been baptized. It is permanently on show in the church, with an information description beside it. John himself is buried, on the right, at Braehead Cemetery. Over the years, Linlithgow has produced many energetic entrepreneurs, most of whom have gone abroad to seek their fortunes. One such was David Waldie. Here he is photographed in later life, but as a young man, he was a dynamic character who, after graduating, practiced medicine in Linlithgow. He was an avid reader of both medical texts and novels. This letter in the middle was sent to him by Charlotte Bronte, replying to Waldie's correspondence in which he expressed his enjoyment at reading Jane Eyre. The letter last year fetched £24,000 at auction. Waldie later moved south to join the Liverpool Apothecaries Company, where he experimented with anaesthetics. On a visit to his hometown, at the family's apothecary shop at 65 High Street, he discussed chloroform with a fellow medic, Dr. James Young Simpson. Waldie promised to send Simpson a sample, but when he arrived back in Liverpool, he discovered that his laboratory and its contents had burned to the ground. Using Waldie's formula, Simpson got an Edinburgh chemist to make up the chloroform and went on to take all the credit. Disappointed at not being given the recognition he deserved, in 1853, Waldie emigrated to India, travelling on the route you see top left, overland. He there took up a post at a Scottish chemical works, Malcolm and Co. in Calcutta. Around 1860, he established his own concern at Barnagore and worked there until he died on 23rd June 1889. He was buried in the Scottish cemetery in what is now Kolkata. Waldie's case was taken up by his brother George, who remained in Linlithgow running the family's printing business. After Simpson's death in 1870, George decided to pursue the matter of his brother's part in discovering the properties of chloroform, and he began a campaign to have him more widely recognised. George printed several pamphlets and mentioned David's contribution in his book, A History of the Town and Palace of Linlithgow, a book that was met with enthusiasm and reprinted several times. In the year of its first publication, 1858, George was invited to join the Fraternity of Dyers, and in 1869, his articulateness and good-humoured approach saw him being elected as their deacon, a position he held for 3 years, leading the fraternity on memorable Marches days. Waldy was an enthusiastic participant, addressing the fraternity at lunch with, as the Falkirk Herald reported, much aplomb, including several songs which he delivered with gusto. Provost Dawson was a great admirer of George Waldy, and in 1878 invited him to give the keynote breakfast address to the Provost Company assembled in the Star and Garter. George remained a well-liked and respected member of the borough community, and in 1882 was elected the first president of the Linlithgowshire Bowling Association. Sadly, he died in office in 1885, aged just 62, and he is buried in the family plot in St Michael's, just behind the borough halls. George died knowing that he had failed to achieve one of his most fervent wishes. His attempt to have a plaque erected to mark his brother's achievements did not reach fruition until 1913, the centenary of David Waldy's birth. Thanks to donations from friends and admirers, a bronze commemorative tablet was fixed to the wall of the family business, now the Four Marys. The pharmacy was taken over by the Spence family, who were related to the Waldys, and they further commemorated Waldy's achievement in 1922, when Deacon of the Dyers Alexander Spence presented to the town council a silver loving cup, designed to look like an apothecary's mortar. The pestle was the ladle. You see it here being used by a century of provosts, and it is still employed to fraternise on deacons' nights and at the marches. Another successful emigrant from Linlithgow was John West, who, according to the company's own website, was born in Linlithgow in 1809. In 1849, he emigrated to America, where, having failed to make his fortune in the California gold rush, he moved to Oregon, where he eventually began catching, canning, and exporting the salmon, which swam in their hundreds up the Columbia River. And the rest is history. To this day, John West salmon is known worldwide, while its Linlithgow-born founder lies in Westport Cemetery in Oregon. Why did he call it Westport? He created the cemetery. Was it a tribute to his birthplace? Yet another successful entrepreneur was John Stalker, who was baptized in St Michael's in April 1836. He began his working life as one of the many shoemakers who operated in Linlithgow, until at the age of 19, he set sail for New York. After some time working for others, he set up his own shoemaking business in the town of Orange in New Jersey. He later branched out into general stores in both the US and Canada, dying a very rich man in 1919. Not all businessmen emigrated. Some stayed locally. William Aiken was born in Trefechan in 1877, but began his working life in Linlithgow as a horse and cart coalman. He operated out of Stockbridge, an open expanse of ground where now stand Domino's and Aldi supermarket. Through sheer hard work and diligence, Aiken was able to purchase a steam lorry, and he used that to convey coal around the borough. But William felt compelled to widen the scope of his activities and decided to enter the road haulage business, purchasing one of his first heavy-duty steam lorries. As his business progressed, he bought more. This Garrett 6-ton steam wagon, registration SX2395, was the 20th and the last in a long line of Garretts bought by Aiken. he was not that happy with this new design, which deviated from the well-regarded 5-ton predecessors. And after 6 months, the engine returned to the Garrett factory in Suffolk. Aiken's employees were rightly proud of being part of this successful company, and every year they entered a decorated float in the Marches parade, often winning first prize for their efforts. Latterly, his sons, William Jr. and Tom, took over more and more of the running of the company, although the founder continued to be involved and took a personal interest in many associated aspects of the business, such as the improvement in road conditions, with many in the area being properly surfaced using a material called monolastic, a patented combination of tar and sand. It did, however, have one problem. It became very slippery when wet, and this caught out one of Aiken's steam lorries when it skidded out of control while crossing the Avon at Linlithgow Bridge. Fortunately, as the crew of 2 leapt to safety, the firebox on the boiler caught on the stonework and stopped it from falling into the river below. In 1939, the much enlarged depot at Stockbridge housed many petrol-driven lorries, his fleet of Buffalos, all of which got about 8 miles to the gallon. As a pioneer of road haulage in West Lothian, Aiken now owned an extensive and prosperous road transport business, and his wealth enabled him to purchase the stone-built mansion Preston House, designed by eminent architects William Byrne and David Bryce. Extensive alterations were made to the premises in 1954, the year that William's wife was invited to crown Linlithgow's Gala Queen, Agnes Mackintosh. And by then, Aiken had sold his company to the British Transport Commission, and they took over his fleet of 131 vehicles and a staff of 235 employees under the name British Road Services. William Aiken died at the end of January in 1965, just short of his 88th birthday. Another considerably smaller transport business was operated by Garvey Davy, a man born in Ireland who had joined the Connaught Rangers and got his sobriquet after the regiment's nickname, the Garveys. He knew about horses, as he had been brought up on a farm in Ulster, and was consequently put in charge of the steeds belonging to the officers in his regiment. When he left the army, he moved to Linlithgow, where he set up a stables in St Michael's Wynd, from where he operated a coach hire business, conveying passengers in a brougham or a slightly larger charabanc. Proud of his stable were 2 beautiful black horses, which were used to pull the town's fire pump, which was kept in a garage in the Kirkgate, once part of the borough halls. Sadly, all trace of this has now gone, even the name above the large door, all obliterated in the £5 million renovation in 2011. Garvey's horses were also used to pull a magnificent hearse. Plumed and black, the animals and the funeral conveyance made quite a spectacle as they proceeded up to St Michael's graveyard. The story goes, however, that one day Garvey's services were required to attend 2 funerals. That over, the horses were stabled for the night when Garvey was alerted to the fact that Murphy's rag store at the west end of town had caught fire. Hitching up his horses to the fireman's appliance, he found that his steeds had obviously got funerals into their heads. Nothing would make them walk any faster than a stately, funereal, solemn gait, while the rag store, meanwhile, burned to the ground. Many are the tales told of local characters who worked in one of the town's now defunct trades, folk like Bobby Bryant, who toiled in the Avon Mill paper factory, a man with, how shall I put it, a unique command of the English language. And his colleagues loved to give him cause to use his extensive Anglo-Saxon vocabulary. The toilets at Avon Mill consisted of 6 cubicles with the pans straddling a drain, along which water ran continuously. One day, when Bobby was duly seated, some young lads set fire to an oil-soaked rag and set it floating along the open sewer till it stopped right beneath Bobby's posterior. His language that day was particularly memorable. Then there were Jimmy Gilshore and Monkey Gibson, who both worked in the Gowanstank glue factory, a factory that made a strong adhesive by rendering down bone, horn, and various animal parts. One cold winter's night, they left work, where St. Joseph's School is now, and ventured into the Cross Keys, or Pat Brady's pub, as it was known. Seeing a roaring fire in the grate, the two thirsty workers stood, pints in hand, with their backs to the warming fire. After a few minutes, the pub was enveloped in an unbelievable stench, as years of accumulated animal grease on their jackets melted. The two men were decidedly unhappy when they were dumped unceremoniously into the snow-covered high street. Jock Mason had a variety of jobs, including working for a time for the town council of Grangemouth, and he would cycle from Linlithgow there and back every day. One commentator once remarked to him that his bike had no front mudguard. "It doesn't matter," replied Jock. "I oil my legs." For 40 years, Jock lived in this makeshift caravan at the foot of Fisher's Brae near Little Mill. He lived alone except for the company of a watchdog, doing his own cooking and washing. He may have lived an eccentric life, but all who knew him testified to his abilities as a communicator, able to converse in all manner of subjects. He would greet passers-by with the cheery call of "Cuckoo, my love," a phrase carved and misspelled on a bench erected in his honour on the site where his caravan used to sit. Another local jock was John McIntyre, better known as Chicken Jock, living as he did amongst the hens at Grogfoot Farm. He would walk into town dressed in a weird assortment of jumble sale-bought clothing, sometimes with a woman's hat or even a tea cosy on his head, and when greeting someone might spin round 3 times and cluck like a hen, or chat to an imaginary friend. Jock died in 1996 and was buried in Braehead Cemetery, his headstone arranged for by his sisters. At his death, he was 87 years old, having been born in 1909 in the reign of King Edward VII, when David Lloyd George was Prime Minister and suffragettes were using militant tactics to secure votes for women. In West Lothian, suffragettes carried out such actions as smashing windows, cutting telephone wires, and creating bomb scares. Several Linlithgow women refused to fill in the 1911 census, following the slogan, "If women don't count, neither shall they be counted." The government clamped down hard, and many protesters were arrested and jailed. A prominent local campaigner was Catherine Blair, who, although born in Bathgate, was often seen promoting the suffragette cause in Linlithgow. In 1913, a meeting was held in the Masonic Hall, attended by Emmeline Pankhurst and chaired by Catherine Blair. It was to protest against the barbaric act of force-feeding hunger strikers. Grace Cadell, born in Carridon, hid suffragettes in her Edinburgh home in Leithwalk and in Linlithgow, so that they could not be taken back to prison under the Cat and Mouse Act. The Masonic Hall meeting was reported in the Linlithgowshire Gazette, but far from sympathetically. The editor, Robert Fleming, wrote, "My thoughts were, for heaven's sake, let these misguided women attend to their household duties and give up this mad cause." Well, with such a reaction, it isn't surprising that Linlithgow suffragettes kept a low profile, and we can only acknowledge them anonymously. Due to their actions and the contribution of women during the war, women over 30 received the vote in 1918. It took decades, however, before women made any inroads into political life. In 1928, on the death of her long-standing MP father, Margaret Kidd stood for Parliament, but was well beaten by Manny Shinwell. Margaret went on, however, to follow an outstanding career in law, becoming Scotland's first ever female KC in 1948. She was invited in 1968 to open the new Linlithgow Academy. In 1930, Janet Wilson was elected as Linlithgow's first female town councillor. Although still in the minority over the years, other women were elected, including Julia Wade and the formidable Margaret Glenn, seen here bottom right with all the other male members at the last ever council meeting. Always immaculately turned out with a flamboyant hat on the morning of March's Day, Margaret's crowning glory was decidedly dishevelled by the evening procession. There were two women of humbler origin, great characters like the traditionally built Kate Waddle, whose unforgettable voice and laughter could be heard from the terraces of a Rose match at Prestonfield. Kate followed the Rose to this match at Tynecastle to play in the East of Scotland Cup final, and she got herself firmly wedged in an entrance turnstile. She roared with laughter as a couple of officials tried to shove her ample frame through. When she was finally freed, she was still outside the ground, until she heard a policeman shout, "Over here, madam, try this." To Kate's even louder amusement, she saw that he had opened up an enormous pair of entrance gates, usually used for vehicle access. Another larger-than-life local was Jenny Nimmo. She was certainly of ample proportion, occasioning the late lamented Alan Steele to comment that when Jenny hung up her knickers to dry, on that day Linlithgow received an hour's less daylight. Many are the old-time Marches characters who revelled in the day and brought joy to others, folk like Baldy, first mentioned during the provostship of local grocer Robert Jamieson in the early 1900s. Thereafter, in the week before Marches, Baldy would call at Jamieson's shop in the High Street and ask whether his horse was ready, and it always was. Here he is, you can just see him there, in 1907, astride his steed, dressed as a military officer, complete with a large medal pinned to his uniform. He was still on the go in 1926, for a poem by Robert Fleming mentions him in connection with the fact that no Marches procession took place that year on account of the general strike. Baldy's pony stands forlorn, Baldy's way a true, sair he wheels at the provost door, there's nae Marches new. Luckily, although the day was rainy, the Marches returned, as you see here, in 1927. And Baldy kept riding until he was too infirm and had to resort to motorised transport. He died in 1933. Another Kenspeckle Marches character was Peter Middlemas, who began his working life in Morrison's shoe factory in Dogwell Wynd. When the factory closed, Peter went to work in Edinburgh, making sure he never missed a Marches Day. However, in 1954, he was not given permission to be off work. So on Tuesday, June the 15th, he was seen heading for the train with tears streaming down his cheeks. It never happened again. And after the Reed Band was formed in 1956, Peter could be found every Marches Day leading the bandsmen up the Kirkgate and through the town. He was none too pleased when in 1962, Provost Laurie agreed that at the evening parade, all the bands should drop out after only one circuit of the cross. This speeded up the procession, but there were many complaints, none more vociferous than that from Peter Middlemas, who objected on the grounds of tradition and the fact that he was robbed of his finest hour, marching at the head of the 5 p.m. procession. When Peter died in 1965, the Reed Band played Abide With Me at 7 a.m. at the West Port on March's morning, before heading off without Peter. Another Marches stalwart was Robert Fleming. In 1961, he stood in temporarily for his father as Baron Bailey of Blackness, and he remained in that post for 42 years, retiring during my provostship in 2004. In his installation speech held on St Ninian's Mound above Blackness Castle, Robert would utter the now immortal words, "There has been no crime in Blackness last year, and I hope there will be even less this year." The court thereupon adjourned the meeting for 12 months, excepting for riots. Robert's effortlessly delivered speeches made on Castle Hill or in the gardens of the Blackness Tea Room, seen bottom left in an earlier incarnation, and then from 2001 at Low Valley House, the speeches were eagerly awaited and never ceased to have the audience in stitches. I was the 14th provost under whom Robert had served, and to recognise his long service, he was awarded life membership of the court, a position he held until his death in 2013. On March's Day, the provost is protected by his halberdiers, and over the years there have been some noticeable gentlemen holding the axe-headed staff. One such was council employee Willie Renton, a man who liked a wee dram from time to time. His first provost in 1966 was garage owner George Baird, seen here bottom left. Willie was to go on serving many more, including the two shown here, Bill Wilson and Jim Shanks. The top right photo shows him beside top left photo shows him beside John Shipton at a crying of the marches. The photo on the left shows Willie at his retirement, receiving a presentation from West Lothian Provost Dominic Macaulay. For many years, his fellow halberdier was another local character, Robert McMeechan, widely known as Puffer. Robert was elected halberdier in the time of Provost Wilson and served until Tom Baird's term of office. He then retired, but came out of retirement stating that he wished to be my bodyguard, as he had kept an eye on me ever since 1974, when I started teaching at Linlithgow Academy, where Robert was the long-serving janitor. In fact, he was the first person I met on my first ever day teaching in Linlithgow. As I walked nervously up to the front door, I saw Robert trying to sweep up leaves. At that point, the wind becomes a vortex, and the more Robert swept, the more the leaves whirl-winded away. Looking up at me with a lugubrious expression, Puffer uttered words I've never forgotten. "I dinna ken why I ever went into effing education." Puffer always had a ready quip, often peppered with the fruity language. When the town halberds were given new heads, cast at Ballantyne's Bowness foundry, Robert remarked that his ancient weapon was now like William Wallace's sword, absolutely original, but with 3 effing new heads and 4 effing new handles. Puffer, Robert Tweed McMeechan, died in June last year and was buried in King's Cavil Cemetery. Not far from the headmaster he served for many years, John Ferguson, another great local character. I once asked Robert where he got his nickname Puffer from, and all he could say that it was his father's name as well, and he just got called it. And according to David Patterson, talking of local characters, that was also the reason that John West was called Bendy. He was an interesting character, an excellent bricklayer who enjoyed a pint or two. He frequented the Black Bitch pub until it was closing time, whereupon he would wend his way home, singing "Them Old Cotton Fields at Home." On one occasion, Bob Hardy, then mine host at the pub, accompanied him, and on entering Bendy's abode, commented on 2 TV sets, stacked one above the other. Bendy explained that the picture had gone on one and the sound had gone on the other, so he switched both on and got vision and sound. Bendy died aged just 63 and is buried in Braehead Cemetery, beneath a headstone paid for by his many friends. He is as much lamented as many others who have gone. People like Jimmy McGinley, a man who served the Linlithgow community in so many ways, seen here in the centre at a Civic Trust themed dinner dressed as a Jacobite, and on the left at March's Day as Big Chief Jimmy with his squaw Ruby and their papooses. One of Jimmy's biggest crusades was to provide Linlithgow with a state-of-the-art leisure centre and a gymnasium and swimming pool. Sadly, he died the year before it opened, but in his honour, the road leading to it was called McGinley Way. And there are so many more, some of them still with us, as demonstrated on this slide. But I hope that the departed characters we have met tonight, I hope they all rest easy, knowing that they have contributed immensely to our local landscape. I also hope that tonight's lecture has also made you enjoy my last Zoom. Thank you.